So continuing with our lecture on the methodology of Ahlus-Sunnah in the acquisition of their creed and the derivation of its principles or its issues and the refutation of the heretics. Unfortunately, that whole hour and a half we spent, or I don't know how long it was, introduction has really taken about 5-10 minutes, but that's normally what happens. I'm sort of long-winded. We want to now come to the next section, and I'm going to try to move the pace up a little bit quicker because I think it's very important. I want to at least cover this. Oh, are we not taking? You can hear us. The sources upon which Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah base their creed, their aqidah. And as I mentioned, that basically they have two fundamental primary sources, okay, that they base their aqidah upon. And that is the Book of Allah and the Sunnah, the authentic Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So, when we come to the sources of Ahlus-Sunnah Jama'ah, they base their creed upon the Book of Allah, the Qur'an, of course, and the Sunnah, or we should say the authentic Sunnah. And the reason why we put this little description over here, the authentic Sunnah, is that as you all are well aware, that there are many narrations which were fabricated upon the Prophet ﷺ, and other narrations might not necessarily be fabricated, but as yet they do not meet the test set by the scholars to confirm that these specific words or actions or approval, tacit approvals are from the Prophet ﷺ. And that is why we say the authentic Sunnah. And unfortunately, the books of Aqidah, even the classical books written by the Salaf, whether it's Kitab al-Sunnah by Abdullah, the son of Imam Ahmed, whether it's Kitab al-Sharia by Al-Ajurri, whether it's Sharh Usul I'tiqad Ahl-Sunnah by Al-Laka'i, these classical books, which normally have a lot of hadith in them, narrations, sometimes have weak narrations, and sometimes even have fabricated, spurious narrations, or what they call mawdu'at. So therefore we need to know the authentic Sunnah. But obviously if you're relying upon like Kitab al-Tawheed, which is in Sahih al-Bukhari, then you know the narrations in there all have met the test and are of the highest quality of narrations on the Prophet ﷺ. So the main source which they base their belief upon is the Book of Allah on the authentic Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Third comes to this is the ijma', or the unanimous consensus, the ijma' or the unanimous consensus of the Salaf. And again, over here we must say that which has been truly affirmed to be their unanimous consensus. Because sometimes it is claimed that they agreed upon something, unanimously agreed upon a point of belief, and yet they had some certain difference of opinion concerning it. Okay? So when we say the ijma' means that, and this is why the famous statement of Imam Ahmed, when somebody says it's known by ijma', he says, how do they know there is an ijma'? Perhaps the people differed concerning this issue. I mean, you can't just claim ijma'. You cannot claim that there was a unanimous consensus there unless you have certain strength in your argument or a certain wide perusal of all the statements of the Salaf. And also we say the unanimous consensus of the Salaf because, as we mentioned before, that the Sahaba and those couple generations after them which have the testimony of the Prophet ﷺ praising them. And as far as the generations afterwards, the Prophet ﷺ spoke about them disparagingly. Although he mentioned there will always remain one group of the Ummah upon the truth, but them as a whole, those other generations were spoke of in a disparaging manner. So the ijma' of the Salaf. And the proof is, one of the strongest proofs and the easiest proofs to understand is from the words of the Prophet ﷺ when he said that my Ummah, my community, would not gather upon error, on any error. So it shows that it's impossible for the whole Ummah in all its members to gather upon an error. And the other thing we should make a point that when we talk about whose statement is of importance for the ijma', it doesn't mean just the general body of Muslims. It means the scholars. The scholars, okay? And also it depends upon the subject. I mean, obviously, for instance, if the issue is dealing with aqidah, a matter of belief, right? Like concerning Allah's sifat, okay? And some grammarian, some scholar of Nahu, you know what I'm saying, doesn't accept the statement, his statement doesn't destroy the consensus of the Salaf concerning that matter. So it also has to go to the specialty. So it means the scholars of aqidah, the scholars of the Salaf, when they said this is something which we understood from the Prophet ﷺ and this is their ijma', their consensus, then therefore this is also a proof. However, though, we should understand that they do not agree upon anything which is outside of the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Messenger ﷺ. It's impossible for them to all, because the Prophet ﷺ said, my ummah will not gather upon error. So it's impossible, for instance, for them to agree upon something which is not found in the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Messenger ﷺ. So we say the Book of Allah, the authentic Sunnah, and the ijma'. Now, there are two other sources of which basis of aqidah in a very wide and general sense, and not really a main source. And that is, the first is reasoning, or al-aql, and the fifth one is al-fitra, or the natural disposition which Allah has endowed in human beings. Natural disposition which Allah has endowed in human beings. That's how I translate the thought, so I hope it conveys the meaning. Okay, how do we know that reason? Well, for instance, certain matters, if you look in the Qur'an very carefully, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala proves certain matters of belief by asking people to reflect upon these matters. And I'll give you an example. Especially with matters concerning reviving the dead, quickening the dead. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala strikes an example, He strikes a similitude with what? With the barren land. That when a land is barren land, like in desert environment, and then a rain occurs upon it, that barren land then produces vegetation. Okay? This is an example that from something which is lifeless, Allah would brought life to it. In the same sense that the people, even after they die and they're in their graves, Allah can bring life to them. And also Allah brings another argument of reason in the Qur'an. He says that, is it not that that the first creation, that the second creation is easier than the first creation? In the sense that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you agree, O people of Mecca, who have some doubt concerning the resurrection at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that Allah created you in the first place. You don't deny that. And therefore, after you die, would it not be easier for Allah then to bring you back to life a second time? Since He brought you to life the first time, what would make it difficult for Him to bring you to life the second time? This is an argument which is based upon in reason. Okay. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tries to tell them sometimes to reflect into the heavens and the earth and see, and since they acknowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator and the sustainer and the giver of life and death, then therefore should they not then only worship Him if they confess and they acknowledge that these are His acts alone. These are arguments of reason. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in refuting the Christians, says, did not Isa ibn Maryam and his mother used to eat food? Okay? Meaning that if they eat food, that means they needed some sustenance, right? And they needed sustenance means they have a weakness. You see what I'm saying? They need to rejuvenate themselves. So therefore, if they're like that, they cannot be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah describes Himself as that He is the one who is not fed, but He's the one who feeds, as in Surah Al-An'am. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using reason. However, the reason, therefore, is, of course, these arguments of reason are, under or are below the Book of Allah and the Messenger ﷺ, in the sense that when we're dealing with the matters of belief, they're usually matters of the unseen. And the details cannot be understood through reason, as I'll explain shortly. And therefore, even though reason is a proof and a source for it, it must be, we must put a condition to it, just like we said, the authentic sunnah, sound reasoning. Sound reasoning, okay? Al-aql as-sahih. Because sometimes somebody might reason something, but his conclusions were not sound, okay? Likewise, al-fitra, the Prophet ﷺ said that every single child is born upon the fitrah, which means the natural disposition which Allah has endowed human beings with. And Allah described Islam as the religion, the fitrah, and also the Prophet in the hadith described it as the religion of the fitrah. So this natural disposition, we also find it. For instance, we find the natural disposition of people that when they pray, and even if you go to any kafir, go to any disbeliever, any homeless person, if he mentions God, or if anybody gets into a car accident, always they look up, when they say, oh God. Why? Because this is something, a natural disposition which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed in human beings, that they recognize that their Lord is above them. Okay, that their Lord is above them. And that's why when people pray, when people have hardship and so forth, you never find them looking left and right. They usually look up, This natural disposition is a proof which we can use to establish that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above His throne. Not that He's above His throne, but He's above us, that He's above us, okay? But the particulars of that He's upon His throne, this is only known through revelation. Through revelation, through the Sunnah. Because there is nothing in reason or through one's natural disposition, right, to know that Allah is upon His throne. Yes, reason necessitates that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can argue that since Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all good and He is greater, and therefore we recognize that as being above is better than being below, so Allah should be above, we can argue that through reason. And also our natural disposition, we find an inclination in ourselves that when we want to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we want to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we look up, But however though, this only shows us that Allah is above us. But does this say that Allah shows us that Allah is upon His throne? That there's a throne and Allah is upon that? No. We only know this through revelation. So this is why one is known through revelation, the details of that, but the general belief is known can be also established through reason and through the fitrah. And again here the fitrah, we must also put a condition to it, the uncorrupted fitrah. Because the Prophet ﷺ did explain that in the hadith he says that then his parents make him a Christian, a Jew, or a fire worshipper. So it means that fitrah can therefore be corrupted afterwards, and so therefore even the natural disposition that person finds, he will find that to be incorrect, you see. And that's why for the Christian it seems perfectly logical and also perfectly fine, he even feels good when he, thinks of the cross and the Trinity and so forth. But because his fitrah has been corrupted, okay. So the point is that the aqidah is based upon what? The Book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Messenger ﷺ. Ijma', the consensus refers back to the Book of Allah and the Sunnah, and in itself is also a proof. Sound reasoning and the uncorrupted fitrah are also proofs for the aqidah, but however though, they are not independent. They're not independent because they cannot gain the details of belief as Allah wants us to do, and also there is no way to really check if that reasoning is sound or that reasoning is false, whether that fitrah is correct or whether that fitrah, that disposition is corrupted or uncorrupted, unless you refer back to the revelation, you see. For instance, if two people are now to argue something by reason, how can we know which one is the correct reasoning and which is not the correct reasoning? Each person obviously feels himself that he's reasoned it out correctly. And also one's natural inclination that he feels, this is correct and this is incorrect. How does one know that, well, the only way to know that if that inclination is a correct feeling or if that's the whispering of the devils, is by referring it back to the Qur'an and the Sunnah, okay? Another proof for the fitrah besides that hadith is the ayah in Surah An-Nur, where Allah says, Nurun ala nur, light upon light. Some of the scholars have explained it, some of the Salaf means, is when the light of revelation is upon the light, falls upon the light which is in the heart from the fitrah. So it increases in light, okay? That it becomes more, the soul becomes more enlightened, okay? So that's basically, the source is very clear. As I said, I want to really speed through this section as quick as possible. But the point is that these two, reasoning, sound reasoning, and the uncorrupted fitrah, are not in themselves independent of revelation. Revelation is the foundation for knowing our belief of Ahlus-Sunnah Jama'ah, and these are proofs, right? But however, that they have to be referred back always to the Qur'an and the Sunnah, so you can know if it's correct or not. Now, this is as opposed to another group of people. Another group of people, the incorrect Islamic sect, the heretical sect, they replaced this with their own principles, the book and the Sunnah, and the ijma'. They usually replace this with some things. One is reasoning, okay, and the second one is sensation, and the third one is dreams. Okay, we find groups that have gone astray will base their beliefs upon these, and they will give them more weight and more precedence to the Qur'an and the Sunnah and the ijma' of the Salaf. We'll find, like, for instance, the philosophers, okay, those Muslim philosophers, and likewise those who have been influenced by the mutakallimin, those who have ilm al-kalam, theology and so forth, they will always try to use the arguments of reason, and they will say that when it seems to us that there's some sort of contradiction between revelation and between reasoning, we must place forward reasoning. So they make this the source of the belief. Likewise, the Sufis, the mystics, right, will place their sensation, their mystic feelings, which they claim they're unveilings and so forth, and mystical experiences, as the foundation for checking against the Qur'an and the Sunnah. So they'll say that if I feel that this is correct or wrong and so forth, I had an experience and so forth, or usually sometimes Sufis will use dreams often. Okay, I had a dream and so forth, and in this dream I was told this is the foundation of their beliefs. So the point is that reasoning, sensation, and dreams in no way are the sources of belief. Yes, you can have true dreams. Yes, you can have correct sensation. There is something called farasa, which is a sensation and so forth. Yes, you can have sound reasoning. But they are not independent in establishing the revelation. They are always dependent upon checking your reasoning, your sensation, your dreams against the balance of the book and the Sunnah. And that which falls correct in it is accepted, and that which is incorrect is going to be rejected. I asked this brother, he said something. Nothing.
I was going to ask you about the last two items from the book, the reasoning and the since they are dependent to the other three, the above items, can they explain them, like using reasoning or etc. to explain something in the Sunnah or in the Qur'an?
What do you mean?
Since you said they are dependent, they cannot be independent of three above items. Can they explain? Can they give you a strong argument to support that?
Now, I understand your question, and as we'll later on approach, inshallah ta'ala, if we have enough time, that the answer is no. Because the point is that the Qur'an and the Sunnah in themselves is not in need of reasoning and of the natural fitrah. The Qur'an has explained in itself the arguments of reasoning and the arguments of al-fitrah, the natural disposition of people, you see. And so therefore, the Qur'an is to not be understood as just certain principles, issues, and we cannot understand these issues unless we have to apply to it a certain reasoning or a certain experience, some sort of intuition or feeling and so forth. That's what the philosophers and that's what the Sufis, the mystics do. They come to the verses in the Qur'an and the narrations of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and they say that these things we cannot understand them unless we place one of these sources, one of these means to explain them. And this is incorrect. What we're saying is, no, that yes, you can, through reasoning, prove things in their religion. Okay? And yes, you can have correct experiences, which are truthful. But there's no way for you to know 100% certainty that your experience, okay, or your reasoning is sound or correct unless you refer back to the Qur'an and the Sunnah. And the Qur'an and the Sunnah in themselves are independent. They are no need of these things. And it's clear in itself in the Qur'an and the Sunnah that it's not necessary in need of these sources, you know what I'm saying? Even though they are in themselves somewhat sources. Wallahu a'lam. Yeah.
What is qiyas? Is qiyas
Qiyas in this sense means, there's two types of qiyas. There's qiyas in the fiqh sense, which Brother Jalaluddin will probably, or whoever's doing the usul fiqh lectures, explain. And there's qiyas in this sense, an analogy, which means analogy through arguments of reason, okay? Through demonstration and so forth. It's a different situation here. This type of qiyas, in terms of matters of belief, is not acceptable. Because in order for you to make qiyas, in order for you to make an analogy, you have to be able to know the reality of what you're striking an example of, you see. And since the matters of belief are usually matters of the unseen, how can you make an analogy with it? You see? But matters of fiqh, there might be two similar matters, so you make one qiyas upon another matter, because they're in front of you, and you can make an analogy to it. Okay?
And this reasoning, you said it's the Qur'an and the Sunnah is independent of reasoning once for a person from the Ahlus-Sunnah, right? Like if he is already a member of the Ahlus-Sunnah and he wants to remove or he wants to derive some belief or an act, it is only then that he relies on the Qur'an. But if a person is not in the fold of Islam, then reasoning is in the Qur'an in need of reasoning.
No, it's not like that. Perhaps I misexplained the whole topic. The issue of reasoning is twofold here. Okay, you know what Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, obviously, right? When Allah Subhanahu wa Taala sent the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in Mecca to those pagan, idol worshippers, right? They neither believed in the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam nor did they believe in the Quran. How was Allah to convince them that this Prophet was true and that this Quran was true? Okay, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala used arguments of reason with them. Like for instance, He said to them, okay, if you are in doubt now that these words which He's saying, these are the words of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, that they're just something that He's fabricated, or that He's learned them from something, or it's a type of poetry, or a type of soothsaying, words of soothsayer or something like that, then come with a Quran like that. This is an argument of reason. It's not an argument of, in the sense, an argument it's based in revelation, because we know the argument is found in the Quran, but it's an argument asking people to reflect and to reason. That's one thing. The second half of the argument, which I was talking about, for instance, that can we prove the existence of the Day of Judgment through reason? Okay? I mean, this is a question that Ibn Taymiyyah talks about, for instance. He says that, according to Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, is the belief of Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah that the only way we know that there is a Day of Judgment is because Allah has told us. And that had Allah not told us, there would be no way for us to demonstrate the existence of a Day of Judgment. Ibn Taymiyyah says no. He says, according to the correct opinion of Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, that we know the existence of a Day of Judgment by revelation and also by reason. How do we know by reason? He gives an example. He says that if you take any child, okay, any baby, and you slap it, you hit it, okay, or if something bites that baby, like an ant or something like that, that baby will continue to cry until it feels that justice has been taken on its behalf. And that's why you notice, what do parents do when children fall down? When their child falls, you know what I'm saying, they usually, and let's say the child falls and hits himself against the chair and starts crying. What does the parent do? He hits the chair, says, oh, bad chair. And then the baby stops crying, right? Why does the baby stop crying? Because Allah has endowed in that baby a thing of reasoning, that if somebody has done injustice to you, that there must be reparation for that injustice. And the baby senses when the parent hits that chair, that some justice has been done, so it feels that it's been satisfied and stops crying. This Ibn Taymiyyah says his words are like this. He says, أَشَدُّ رَسُوخًا فِي النُّفُوسِ. It is more entrenched or in the souls of people than to know that, for instance, that a part can never be bigger than the whole. See? This is something which Allah has created in human beings. They realize that the part can never be bigger than the whole. But he says that this concept is more deeply entrenched in the souls. See, so this is an argument of reason. Okay. How do we know that this line of thought, though, is correct? This is sound reasoning and false reasoning. We need the revelation to prove it, you see. And that's it. And there are just very few matters that you can show by reasoning. We can show that Allah exists by reasoning. How do we know that Allah exists? Because there is not a single action except it has to have an actor to it. There's not a single effect except it has to have a cause. And likewise, since there's a creation, somebody has to have brought that creation into existence. And that's why Allah says to people in Surah 4, right? Were they created from nothing, or were they themselves the creators? Right? Were they created from nothing, or were they themselves the creators? Right? Meaning that obviously if their existence has been here on the earth, there's something has to have brought them into existence. This is an argument of reasoning. But now, all the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and all what Allah deserves from the different forms of worship, and so forth, can reason determine that? No. revelation has to come in, you know what I'm saying, to explain that. And that's all that matter was about. Don't look into it more than was there. Okay, so that was basically in brief the different characteristics of the belief of Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, or not the characteristics, the sources, okay? Now we say there are certain characteristics, okay? I want to quickly go through these. And I have 7 characteristics of the Aqeedah of Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, in the sense that when we start saying now that this belief that we are striving to learn and we uphold in our hearts, inshallah ta'ala, and we want Allah to judge us upon, it has certain unique characteristics, unique qualities that distinguish it from every single other belief system, whether that is the beliefs of a different sect or a faction in the Islamic Ummah or a religion outside the fold of Islam. And I have, how many characteristics do I have? I have 7 characteristics. The first characteristic that it is a divine, infallible origin. So these are the unique characteristics, right? Unique characteristics. That is of a divine, infallible origin. Okay. For instance, all other religions, beliefs are based upon people. The Christians, for instance, they have the creed of so-and-so. They have the creed of this council of so-and-so, which they gather together and they say, this is the tenets of our religion. Okay? Also, in the different sects of the Ummah, the different groups of the Ummah, they always will say that this is the belief of this group. They identify themselves with a certain party or a certain person or a certain historical event. The belief of Ahlus-Sunnah Jama'ah is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We say we believe only what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us. This is why we said the first 2 sources, and this is the main sources of the Qur'an and the Sunnah. So it's of divine origin, and therefore it's infallible. There can be no contradiction in our belief. Okay? We can either have contradiction like the Christians, who say that God is one person but yet 3 persons at the same time. This is contradictory. Or at the same time, like the beliefs of, let us say, like the Shia, for instance, right? Who yet, say that the Prophet's companions, okay, were all hypocrites and were disbelievers and were renegades from the faith and so forth, and yet they're the ones who spread Islam throughout the regions of the earth. And yet the Prophet ﷺ confided upon them and relied upon them and so forth. How could this be? Why would if a person doesn't believe, somebody was a hypocrite, right, and doesn't believe in something, and actually he was a renegade and was actually working to destroy it, why would he at the same time put his life and his wealth and his whole life history just to serve the purpose of that, and even after the death of the Prophet ﷺ still go on and do more than that? This is contradictory, okay? So because it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is infallible in the sense there's no errors or faults in it, and then also there's no contradiction you can find, okay? Other beliefs, you will find, this is one of the main characteristics. Other people, their beliefs are basically fall under 2 things. Either under philosophical speculation, or a mystical experience. In the words of Ibn Taymiyyah, he says, Qiyas falsafi wa kashf sufi. This is what other beliefs fall under. Or there are combinations, of that, okay? But the people of the Sunnah, we take our beliefs from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not upon philosophical speculation, nor upon mystical experience. These are 2 opposite extremes and have deviated from the truth. That's the first characteristic. And also, from this is that, since it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's also uncorrupted. Because we know that from the Islamic religion, it's one of the self-evident truths that this is the last revelation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent to mankind, and Allah has promised to preserve it, right? So therefore it's uncorrupted. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has preserved the book, and obviously has preserved the foundation of the book, which is the belief system and the creed and the sunnah, and so forth. So, therefore, we find the other people who claim that their religion relies in a divine source, like the Christians, right? Their religion is one which it has been corrupted, it has been replaced by one of their own making. And this is why, look at the book that Ibn Taymiyyah wrote in response to the Christians. What did he call his book? He called it Al-Jawab al-Sahih. Because what happened was that some Christians wrote an essay, a treatise refuting Islam. Okay? Ibn Taymiyyah refuted that. He called it al-Jawab al-Sahih. The correct response for what? لِمَنْ بَدَّلَ دِينَ الْمَسِيحِ. For he who has changed, replaced the religion. Really, بدل means to replace the religion of the Messiah. Meaning Isa ibn Maryam, okay? Meaning he's replaced it with one of his own making. So even if somebody was to claim that their religion is, their beliefs are in divine source, it has been replaced and has been corrupted. Unlike our beliefs, Ahlus-Sunnah Jama'ah. This is a response, okay?
How can do both of those mystical experience and philosophical speculation fall under divine?
No. These are wrong paths. These are wrong paths. What I'm trying to say is that we have, our religion is based upon divine origin, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, revelation. Other people's belief is either lies in mystical speculation or in philosophical speculation or in mystical experience. And those who claim that their religion lies, their beliefs rely on divine origin, like the Christians, they have been corrupted. So we are uncorrupted. Yeah, the opposite. The opposite or the opposite. Okay, the second characteristic, mind you, is that in our beliefs, which makes our beliefs unique, than I'm saying, is that it agrees with sound reasoning and with man's natural disposition, endowed in him by Allah. Otherwise, al-Aql-Sahih and al-Fitra. You will not find any Islamic belief which goes against sound reasoning and man's natural disposition. However, though, you might find a Muslim, or even a non-Muslim, right, harbor some doubt concerning an Islamic belief because their reasoning is not sound, or their fitra has been corrupted. You see? However, though, when a person's reasoning is sound and his fitra is not corrupted, he finds the aqidah fits perfectly. And this is why the verse comes, nurun ala nur, light upon light, according to one explanation. Furthermore, and this is like, for instance, the Christians, for instance, I was explaining earlier when we were sitting between after Salat al-Asr. When they come with their belief of the Trinity, right, it has no basis in reasoning. I mean, reasoning shows that belief in Trinity is false. And that's why they say it lies in faith, in revelation. And they say it's a mystery, because there's no way they can prove to it logically, I'm saying not logically, they can prove through sound reasoning that this is the correct belief. Likewise, you find people who say that Allah is everywhere, that their natural disposition is that when they have some sort of hardship, you never find them looking here and down there and to the left and to the right. They always raise their hands and their eyes look up. You see what I'm saying? But so their beliefs go against what their natural disposition is. Okay? Even though they might enunciate something, they say, no, the way we don't believe in this. We know it. We say that Allah is everywhere and so forth. So the point is that the correct creed agrees with man's sound reasoning and with natural disposition endowed into him by Allah. Okay, the third one, the characteristic, is that this sound creed, this aqidah of Ahlus-Sunnah Jama'ah, is one of clarity, straightforwardness. Clarity and straightforwardness. And forward. I gotta spell it right. Forwardness. Okay. In the sense that, the Islamic aqidah is very simple. It has no, it's not like, for instance, anybody's ever read philosophy, right? And tried to understand the arguments of the philosophers. Like if you read something by Aristotle or by Plato, you get lost in it. Okay? Even if you read the arguments of the sects which have gone astray, like the Ash'aris, and try to understand what they're talking about, you get lost. Because it is one of complexity. Not because complexity in the sense that because it has some sort of lofty idea or something like that, because it's contradictory. And it doesn't agree with one's sound reasoning, nor does it agree with man's natural disposition. So therefore you find yourself, both your mind and your soul, have some sort of disgust and some sort of desire to stay away from it, and you find it difficult to understand it. Okay? And I'll give you an example. The scholars say there are certain things which there is no way you can explain. It makes no sense whatsoever. One of the things is the statements of the Ash'ari, that an action, see the Ash'ari, they will not say, for instance, because they believe that Allah compels everybody for their actions, okay? And they believe that nobody can do an action upon him by his own accord, by his own choice. They say that, for instance, that if you take a knife and you kill somebody, you don't kill the person with the knife, but death occurs at the knife, okay? And for instance, because they don't believe anything has an action to itself, they'll say fire doesn't burn, but burning, the sensation of burning occurs in the presence of fire. This makes no sense whatsoever. Okay? I mean, if you try to think about it, as much as you try to think about it, as much as you try to look at their arguments of their greatest scholars and try to explain it, it makes no sense whatsoever. Everybody understands that fire has the property of combustion, right? And it causes burning. This is something which is well understood. They say no, that's not true. They believe it's something wrong against the aqidah to say that fire has the property of combustion and that it causes the burning. They say no, that burning occurs near fire, or next to fire, but fire doesn't burn. Fire and ice are like the same thing. There's no difference between the two. But near fire, you have the sensation of burning. And as a side point, you see, this is why Muslims went backwards in science and so forth. Some people think Muslims went backwards in science. They don't understand why. When Muslims left straight aqidah, they didn't believe that there are causes and effects. The Ash'aris don't believe in causes and effects. Okay, that's why they say things burn near fire, but they don't burn. Fire doesn't burn. Scientific investigation is no longer necessary, right? Right? Why would you want to investigate why has this property and that has that property and so forth, you see? And when this belief became commonplace in the Muslim world after centuries and centuries, scientific investigation ended, and Muslims became very backwards, their civilization and so forth. This is a direct effect, and Allah knows that. But the point is that the aqidah is one which is free of all contradictions, is one of clarity and straightforwardness. That's 3 and 4. Clarity and straightforwardness is 3, and 4 free of contradictions. I sort of mentioned that earlier. So 4 free of contradictions. And the reason why we find it free of contradictions, another proof that it's free of contradictions, is that look at all the other people of the other sects. You never find any great scholar of Ahlus-Sunnah Jama'ah leaving, of Ahl Hadith, right? Leaving the beliefs of Ahl Hadith and then becoming a Sufi, or becoming a Ash'ari, or becoming a Shi'i. Never in history. But you find the people, the great scholars of the other groups, leave those beliefs and then come to the beliefs of Ahlus-Sunnah Jama'ah. And I'll give you an example. Al-Ash'ari himself went through 3 stages in his life. Finally coming to close to the beliefs of Ahl al-Hadith when he agreed with the beliefs of Ahl al-Hadith in general, maybe not all the particulars, and he wrote a book called Al-Ibana, which was one of the final works he wrote before his death. Likewise, we find Al-Baqillani, which is one of his main students, also coming to a change towards the end of his life in a book called at-Tamīmī. Also we find Al-Juwayni and his son, Imam al-Haramain, also towards the end of life forsaking Ash'ari and trying to come to the beliefs of Ahlus-Sunnah Jama'ah or Ahl al-Hadith. We also find Al-Ghazali, it's reported that also he made this final conversion in the end of his life. And Al-Shahrastani and Al-Razi and others. So we find historically that the people who are philosophers, the people who are great scholars of Ash'ariyah, of philosophy, and even of different religions will come to Islam. We never find, historically, any sort of great imam in Ahlus-Sunnah Jama'ah who has left the beliefs of Ahl al-Hadith and have taken the beliefs of anybody else. And that's because there's no contradiction in the beliefs. Why would you forsake it? Okay, and that was the 4th characteristic. The 5th characteristic is that this aqidah is the cause of victory in this world and success in the hereafter. How do we know that? Well, that's true. Well, not history. But the hadith, remember the 2 hadiths we mentioned in the lecture before that? Prophet said there's always one group which will remain upon the truth. And we said that group was Ahl al-Hadith, right? And there will always remain one, the saved sect in the hereafter, that's Ahl-Sunnah or Ahl al-Hadith, right? So that means this aqidah, therefore, is the cause of victory in this earth, right? Ascendancy and also success in the hereafter. And that's the 5th characteristic. The 6th characteristic is that this aqidah It's the creed of unity. It gathers people, okay? And that's something very clear. I mean, that's why they were called the Jama'ah, right? And that's because they've gathered themselves upon this truth. And that's why you find only true unity among the adherents to this belief. All other groups, all other sects, all other religions, they appear to be unified, but they really have a lot of differences between them. You know what I'm saying? Allah talks about the Christians. He says, بَأْسُهُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ شَدِيد. That their enmity between them is very severe. And Allah in the Qur'an says, you see them as one, وَقُلُوبُهُمْ شَتَّى. And their hearts are different, you see. So the other groups, they always differ. That's why you always find sects split into more sects, and split into more sects, and split into more sects, and split into more groups, until they become so few and so in number. But this is something you never find among Ahlus-Sunnah Jama'ah. The same belief that the people of the Sunnah today have, the scholars of Ahlul Hadith today have, same belief they had 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, all the way to the time of the Prophet ﷺ. We read the same books. We don't have anybody come and say, okay, this is the new, revised edition of the Sunni belief, We're going to change some things here and there. No, we read the same books which were authored by those scholars, over 1,000 years ago. And that's because it is a creed of unity, and also the seventh characteristic that I just sort of pointed to, that it is constant and unchanging. Okay? Even though people now think that to evolve is to become better, sometimes to evolve is not to become better. Okay? So, in fact, our belief goes back to Adam. The same creed we have, Ahlus-Sunnah Jama'ah, is the same belief of Adam, of Noah, of Moses, of Ibrahim, of Isa and Maryam, all the prophets and their followers. Why? Because their belief in Allah is the same as our belief in Allah. Their belief in the Day of Judgment is the same as our belief in the Day of Judgment. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, Deenul Anbiya Wahid. The religion of the prophets are one. Okay?
What about the hadith of Rasulullah?
Sorry, son. Right. Right.
Going back to the 6 points we're making.
Of unity.
Yes.
Right. Those sects, they split off from the main body. They innovated something. You see, it's not like, it's different when you say, for instance, okay, this is our principles, and we divide upon those principles. Because those principles are in themselves false. Like the Shia, they all believe, that ʿAli had the right to Khilafah. But then because their beliefs are false, they then divided afterwards who had, after Ali's death, the right to Khilafah. So you have the Ismailis, and you have the Ja'faris, and you have the Zaydis, and so forth and so on, the Kaysanis, and so forth and so on. With our case in those 22 sects, as you correctly pointed out, they innovated their own religion. You see, they came up and they propped up their own religion, and they forsake this one. So there was no splitting in our part. They just quit, our ranks. It's not like we divided within our beliefs. You see what I'm saying?
These are the people over there.
Yeah, the Prophet has, forewarned that they are destined to hellfire, but it doesn't mean that they are all condemned to hellfire. Just like a person who makes zina now. That's all here, the one who murders, right? He's under the threat of punishment. Allah might forgive him, he might have good deeds to wipe it out. There are different things, that come into play.
If you look around today, some people might start trying to identify certain groups as being among those groups that will be of the hellfire. That, maybe are in our midst here in America. Some of them may not necessarily be among those groups.
Yeah, that's true.
They definitely have some misbelief, some incorrect belief. But they will still be a part of the Jama'ah. They're off base on.
And the point is that, and just to answer this question, and we'll just leave it at this, is that those 72 groups should not be understood that they are disbelievers. The Prophet said they are from his ummah. They're people of the ummah, but they're not, what I'm saying, that they're under the threat of punishment. Just like the one who consumes the wealth of the orphan, the one who commits illicit sex, the one who murders, and so forth. They're under the threat of the punishment of Allah. So those groups, like the Qadianis, for instance, they're not part of the 73 sects. They're outside of the ummah. They're apostate. When we talk about those 72 groups, we mean people who are Muslims. This is something to understand very clearly, that there are Muslims, but they are under the threat of punishment. The Qadianis, these other groups, Baha'is, you know what I'm saying, and so forth and so on, historically, these groups are not considered part of the 72 sects. These are outside the fold of the Ummah, okay? And we can leave that for some other time, inshallah. Yes, sir.
Whose 7 characteristics are these?
Huh?
Whose 7 characteristics? No.
Who's defined them?
Yeah.
No, that's not mine. Nothing, I promise you. Brother.
I know they're based on Sunnah, but...
No, nothing in my lecture is something that I innovated from me. This is, I think I took these from a book by Nasr al-Aql, the same scholar who I translated that article in that 2 issues ago in Bashir. In one of his other works, he mentioned quickly 7 principles. I might have just changed the order around, that's possible, what I'm saying, or the wording of the, not the same exact wording, but that's found in the lectures. So we have 7 sentences. Okay. We now came to the next juncture, which is now we've, actually entered into the lecture. We discussed an introduction, what is the word aqidah, what is Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, what does the Salaf al-Salih mean, and we also discussed the sources of the aqidah of Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah. We discussed the unique characteristics, which we just mentioned. So now we want to talk about the actual methodology used by Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah in acquiring and deriving their creed. Okay. So there are basically 12 principles, which was mentioned in that article by Nasr al-Aql. And I might have just changed the order or reworded some of them, but that's the source of it. So I would like to now mention these 12 principles, which we can say they form the basis of the methodology or the manhaj employed by Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah in acquiring and deriving specific issues of their belief. Now, why do I want to say briefly mention? Because Ibn Taymiyyah himself, as I mentioned in earlier in the first lecture, took one of those principles and expounded it in a work which has been recently edited and published in 10 volumes. And if we were to make this whole week just to discuss one of these principles, we probably wouldn't discuss it in its fullest sense. Okay. The idea is that we just want to try to understand the general intent behind these principles, right? So that we may prepare ourselves for further, reading and understanding and discussion and so forth. Just to lay ourselves, we want to lay a foundation. I mean, the whole idea behind these lectures, inshallah, or my whole intent in these lectures in the next couple of days is to try to lay a foundation, right? That later on we have to build upon through visits or through writings or whatever the means, but we need to build later on just to lay the foundation. That's all I'm trying to do. So the first principle, which we may say, is that the source or the aqidah, the source for the aqidah of Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, as I mentioned earlier, is restricted solely to the Qur'an, the Sunnah, and the Ijma' of the Salaf al-Salih, the confirmed Ijma' and the authentic Sunnah. That's the first principle. Remember, as I said that, reason, sound reasoning, and the fitrah, the natural disposition, the uncorrupted fitrah, while that does provide a basis for understanding some of the belief, but really there's such a limited scope that we cannot make it a major category. So we want to restrict it only to those 3 matters. As opposed to those people who base their religion and their beliefs upon what? Did I say earlier? I mentioned 3 things, huh? Right, mystical experience, dreams, and philosophical speculation, right? These counter these 3 principles, okay? We say no to the kitab, the sunnah, and the ijma'. And there are certain benefits for us to base our belief upon that. One is that, well, we'll come to that later on, inshallah. When we say the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, this is the second principle. We say that we will accept whatever is confirmed upon the Prophet ﷺ, whether it comes to us in a mutawatir or an ahad mode. Okay? Now when I said the confirmed sunnah, the authentic sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, by definition I mean in whatever means of transmission it comes to. Mutawatir means, as you all probably will take in your hadith lectures, It means that narration of the Prophet ﷺ, which has been narrated by so many chains of narration throughout each level of the narration that it's impossible for it to be a lie. It's called mutawatir. And the ahad is the opposite. It means really ahad means non-mutawatir. Ahad does not mean the report of a single person, as some people imagine. Ahad means just non-mutawatir, whether it comes 3 or 5 or 1. The point is, it's non-mutawatir. Okay? And the reason why I say that, why did I make this the second principle, not I, why did the Shaykh, who I'm quoting, made the second principle, is because a lot of people will say we only accept aqidah if it's in a mutawatir mode from the Sunnah. That if it's in ahad mode, we will not accept the aqidah, the matter of aqidah. Therefore, they reject a lot of matters of belief. And this is a problem which occurred very early in the history of Islam. And I'd like to refer to you to 2 works which you can read in the English language, which will provide, inshallah ta'ala, some further explanation concerning. The first is Al-Risala by Imam al-Shafi'i, which has been translated by Johns Hopkins University. An Iraqi Christian translated, and the translation is not bad. And you can probably, it's out of print, but I think it's been reprinted in England by Islamic Text Society or something like that. He has a whole chapter there, Imam al-Shafi'i, concerning proving religious matters by the hadith of the ahad. The hadith of the ahad, the non-mutawatir hadith, is a religious proof. The second one is volume 9 of Sahih al-Bukhari. Imam Bukhari he has a book called about hadith akhbar al-ahad, and then he has a book called Adherence to the Qur'an and Sunnah, and then his book of Tawheed in volume 9, the last volume of Sahih Bukhari. And there he brings proofs also. Now the proofs of Imam Bukhari might not be so clear. You might need some explanation from Fath al-Bari. But inshallah, at least that with Imam Shafi'i's Risala, that one chapter, is a reference point that the brothers can use to find the proof that the ahad hadith is a proof of the religion. And there are other ways to prove it, but it's just as I said, a brief explanation of these points. So what did we explain over here? We said that the source of our aqidah, the first principle for the aqidah of Ahlus-Sunnah Jama'ah, is that it's restricted solely to the Qur'an, Sunnah, and the Ijma'. Instead of put QS. Okay. These are the 12 principles, right? The 12 principles. The second one is that the Sunnah, whatever is confirmed upon the Prophet ﷺ, the confirmed Sunnah, we must believe in it, whether it's mutawatir or ahad. Okay? What's the third principle? The third principle is that the Prophet ﷺ has explained all the fundamentals of the religion. And this is of utmost importance to really reflect upon this. Because as at-Tamīmī says, he says this is in this volume 19 over here, concerning this one principle over here. Just like to show you, how much he's written concerning it, just to give you an idea. Okay, he has this one essay concerning this principle, which covers from page 155 to page 202 in this volume 19. 155 to 202. It's almost like, 50 odd pages, 48 pages, something like that, 47 pages. So I'm trying to say that we're just going through these principles very quickly, that we each need investigation, okay? Ibn Taymiyyah says this is the fundamental of all fundamentals in this subject. Why? Because many people imagine revelation, the Prophet ﷺ, to be merely like a postman. The mail deliverer, mail carrier, he just comes and delivers you a letter, and that's up to you to do with it what you want to do afterwards. But we have to understand that not only did the Prophet ﷺ come to us with the Qur'an and the Sunnah, and there was no tampering in it whatsoever, and the Sahaba then transmitted that to us, and it's until today in its pure, pristine form, but that these were explained by the Prophet ﷺ, especially when dealing with matters of the fundamentals of religion. There is nothing which we need to know and believe except for the Prophet ﷺ has explained to us. And the Sahaba understood this very carefully. That's why Abu Dhar said, there is not a single bird flapping its wings in the heavens which has some knowledge concerned about it. That there's something we have to know about it, except for the Prophet ﷺ has explained to us something about it. So, all the fundamentals of religion the Prophet ﷺ has explained to us. And here, there are three groups of people. The first group of people are the philosophers. They go against this principle. They don't accept it. The philosophers. What do the philosophers say? The philosophers like Al-Farabi, great, Islamic philosopher in the sense of Islamic history, had an essay, called Al-Madinah al-Fadila, or something like Blessed City, something like Utopia, you know what I'm saying, which he based it upon Aristotle's Republic. And also he had an essay concerning music and stuff like this, It's a big person in Islamic philosophy. He basically says what? He says the Prophet ﷺ, indeed all the prophets, are ignorant. They don't know what they're talking about. This is contention. And as a result, what is prophethood in his opinion? His prophethood is really the combination of three powers that a person has. One is an imaginative power, a power of imagination, that the person imagines to see things like objects and hear sounds, and that's revelation. He calls this revelation. The second type of power is that he has the power to affect the natural course of the universe. And those are his miracles, like splitting the moon and so forth. He has some sort of innate power which allows him to change the laws of the universe. Those are the miracles of the Prophet. And the third power is that he has an ability to learn without being taught. That from the active intellect. The philosophers, they have this crazy belief, something called the active intellect, the al-aql al-fa'al. They say there's this active universal intellect, that they can the Prophet can tap into this directly without having to learn, through rigorous learning, scholastic learning. This is prophethood in his opinion. And yet, he believes that when the Prophet started talking about Allah and the Day of Judgment and the realities and so forth, it was all wrong. That the truth of the matter lies in their speech, in the philosophical speech. And people like Aristotle and Plato and Socrates and all these other, idiots, are more knowledgeable than the Prophet ﷺ and the other prophets. And this is clear kufr, without doubt. But the point is, they don't accept this principle that the Prophet ﷺ has explained all the fundamentals of religion. They say no. What he's explained is wrong. You need philosophy in order for you to become enlightened, for you to understand these issues of metaphysics. Because metaphysics means that which is beyond reason or beyond sight or something like that. The second group, is also another group of philosophers, like Ibn Sina. So this is the second group of philosophers. This was Al-Farabi. Second group of philosophers are also philosophers like Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina, famous doctor and something. His medical text of Qanun was used for centuries in Europe. What does he come to the matter? He was a good doctor maybe, but what was it comes to the matter of religious matters? He says, no, you can't imagine the prophets were ignorant. That's a bit too much. But what they did, they lied. How did they lie? They made up things, like paradise and hell, and that there is Allah sitting on a throne, or not say sitting, Allah is above the throne, and He's watching and He's hearing and so forth. They make these things up. Why? Because who are they talking to? Here is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ coming in a desert full with a bunch of Bedouins. These uncouth, uncivilized, half-naked Arabs in the desert. All they know is their camels and so forth. How is he going to bring them culture? Well, might make some motivation for them. So, he describes to them a Lord which can see and hear and knows and everything like that. And he also describes them that they do these certain good deeds, they'll get paradise, and they do certain bad deeds, they'll be punished. And in paradise it has certain pleasures, and in hell it's certain punishment to encourage them to do good deeds. So his argument is not that the prophets were ignorant, but they lied for a good reason, for the advancement of man. And that's his argument. The third argument, and that's because only a few enlightened people can understand philosophy, so the overwhelming majority, masses of mankind, they need to have these type of motivational. The third group is like the theologians, like the people who study ilm al-kalam, okay? Like al-Ghazali. Famous person, died in the year 505. What was his argument? He said, no. We can't say the prophets, lied, and that's kufr. Nor can we say the prophets were ignorant, that's kufr. But what? The prophets purposely left the matter silent. Because they knew that people, if they were to talk about it, people would not understand and believe it. So what they're saying is that the prophet purposely left the matter, in other words, the prophet left the matter, how did I translate this over here? Yeah, the prophets were deliberately vague. For if they truly explained these realities, it would cause confusion and distress in the minds of their followers. Okay? How are you supposed to then understand the true realities of paradise and the hellfire and Allah and the attributes and why we're here? Well, there's two ways. Either you can take the route of philosophical speculation or the route of mystical experience. Either become a philosopher or become a Sufi. And then, when you reach a certain level, then you'll understand. You see, that's the question that they come with. Then you'll be able to use your reason to explain these things. Or if you're a Sufi, if you do these certain exercises, starve yourself and say dhikr so many thousands of times, all of a sudden one day, you'll wake up and you'll be enlightened. You'll have a kashf, an unveiling, and the veil upon the reality will be removed from your eyes and you can see things as they truly are. This is their argument. Okay? And this is a very, very false argument. What is our position? The Prophet explained all the fundamentals of the religion. And do you see how the importance of this principle is now? After explaining how these people have gone astray? Okay? Not only did he explain, and this is another important point, not only did he explain the certain issues of belief, like there's this and these matters of belief, but also the evidences which show these beliefs, and the correct, this is what I think, the derivation of the beliefs and so forth, was all explained by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And this was all then transmitted by the Sahaba, and has been transmitted generation after generation. This knowledge will remain in this ummah until Allah inherits the earth and all that's upon it. Yes?
Do you reference with Mr. saying those things? Well, not Ibn Sina.
Yeah, Ibn Tamīmī mentions that essay of his, you know what I'm saying? And it's from Ibn Sina's book called Al-Isharat.
Is that Fatawa?
This is Fatawa, volume 19. Okay. Ibn Sina has a book called Al-Isharat. Okay, or maybe it's his book Ilm al-Hikmah, I'm not really certain, but it's one of his classical works. Ibn Tamīmī makes reference to which book it is. Okay, he also makes reference to which book by al-Ghazali and so forth. And I saw in the Ghazali's book, I found the statement that Ibn Tamīmī, his reference to it, Ibn Tamīmī was mentioned by al-Ghazali. I found that myself. I checked it up myself and I found it there. And Ibn Sina, I haven't myself through a primary source, through Ibn Sina's own work. So I found people quoting Ibn Sina, like Orientalists, saying the same thing that Ibn Tamīmī was.
What does he say?
No, he said that the prophets were purposefully vague. They didn't explain.
Purposely what?
Vague.
Wait.
Okay. That they purposely did not want to explain the matters. How the beliefs are. Okay. In other words, they were as Ibn Taymiyyah says, they accused them of what? Of treachery to the revelation, because Allah in the Qur'an says, "Ya ayyuhan nabi," right? Relate what has been, or convey that which has been revealed to you. And no, but they purposely were vague. They didn't lie. And they said that there was reasons why, because it was a time for jihad and setting up the Islamic State, and they didn't really, and the people were not able to understand and so forth. They said in order for you to understand, in other words, that if you look at the Qur'an and the Sunnah and you try to understand beliefs correctly, it won't help you. That if you just say that I want to understand based on belief upon the Kitab and the Sunnah, that's not sufficient. That you need either philosophical speculation or mystical experience in order to understand it. Otherwise, it doesn't fulfill.
Well, if this was an accompanied with a belief also that maybe someone else would come that would explain it further or something.
Right. A third group, it's a third group which you can add as a third besides the philosophical explanation, the mystical experience, that this knowledge was some sort of reference point besides the Prophet ﷺ, okay? And this can come over here against this point. When we say restricted to the Qur'an and the Sunnah, they say that this knowledge is somewhere else, not the Qur'an and the Sunnah, like with some sort of hidden imam or something like that. You know, there's some sort of other source other than the Qur'an and the Sunnah, okay? That can be placed, understood from branching from that. Okay, so now that what did we understand now in those principles, right? That the foundation belief is restricted only to the Qur'an, the Sunnah, and the Ijma', right? The confirmed consensus and the authentic Sunnah. The Sunnah, whether it comes to us in the mutawatir mode or the ahad mode, we must accept it, right? That the Prophet ﷺ clearly explained the fundamentals of the religion. That is not just a matter of just conveying to us, but also explained it, okay? Comes the next point in our belief. Number 4, the fourth principle, that the reference point, therefore, what would be the reference point for understanding? I mean, in our case, in understanding the Qur'an and the Sunnah. I mean, we have now concurred that we're only going to take our belief in the Qur'an and the Sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ explained it. So what is our reference point for that? Well, we have 3 points. The first point is that those clear, unequivocal texts of the Qur'an and the Sunnah. This is a reference point for understanding Aqidah, right? It's understood, right? For understanding Aqidah. Aqidah or creed. There are certain things in the Qur'an and the Sunnah are clear and unequivocal, right? I mean, there's no way that it can possibly be misunderstood. Especially the very major issues of belief. Like, for instance, the finality of the Prophet ﷺ. Do we need to prove this through the consensus of the Salaf? No. This is something clear, unequivocal in the Qur'an and the Sunnah. The fact that there's a last day and people will be raised from their grave. This is something clear and unequivocal, right? So these things are the first reference point. The second reference point is the understanding, as you correctly pointed out, brother, the understanding of the Salaf. And we now know who we mean by the Salaf, right? And obviously those scholars who followed the understanding of the Salaf, by extension, throughout the centuries. This is the second reference point. There are some matters which is not one of these clear, unequivocal texts of the Qur'an and Sunnah. I'll give you an example. The issue, is the Qur'an created, the created speech of Allah, or did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala literally speak the Qur'an, and his own words, uncreated words, revealed to him? This, for many people, might not be clear and unequivocal just from the Qur'an and Sunnah. But in this case, we go to the understanding of the Salaf. Okay? Although, I mean, it is really clear in the Qur'an and Sunnah that, the Qur'an is uncreated and it's the actual literal words of Allah. But many people might not apparently understand that, like the question of the people will be raised from their graves for a reckoning. It's not as clear for most people. So here we come to the understanding of the Salaf. The third reference point we have is the Arabic language. And over here we have to, obviously, the Arabic language went at the time of revelation, not modern standard Arabic 101 taught in University of Colorado. Is this what university is called? Oh, okay, well, whatever. It's Georgetown University. Okay. School of Foreign Affairs. Huh?
We have 505 in Austin.
505 in Austin. It means the Arabic language is during the time of revelation. Okay? Now, here is something which is a corollary, okay, sub-rule of this principle, to this point 3. Sometimes, linguistically, things are plausible. They have more than one meaning. It's plausible, okay? If something is plausible in the Arabic language, okay, it's a plausible meaning that contradicts either the clear, unequivocal text of the Qur'an and Sunnah or the understanding of the Salaf and those scholars who have their understanding. We will not put forward a plausible understanding of the Arabic language above that. And I'll give you an example. Even if this is not plausible, but just for the sake of argument, okay? The people who deny that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is upon his throne, right, will argue that, according to the Arabic language, the word al-istiwa which in Arabic literally means to rise above and settle. Okay? And Allah uses this several times in the Qur'an to describe Himself. He says that He has risen above and settled upon His throne. They will explain this, they say it means conquered. Okay? And they will use a line of Arabic poetry. It's a spurious line of Arabic poetry. And it occurred after revelation by, some great side, where it says, قَدْ اسْتَوَى بِشْرٌ عَلَى الْعِرَاقِ, that Bishr had istawa upon Iraq. Okay, and it was conquered Iraq, okay? Not with sword and bloodshed and so forth. So, this is a line of poetry. And they use this as an argument to say that the word istiwa can mean conquer. So therefore, we are to understand this verse, Ar-Rahman wa ala al-Arsh istawa, that the merciful has istawa or has risen above and is above and settled upon His throne, to mean that He has conquered His throne. Well, first of all, we said Arabic at the time of revelation. So that's not part of the Arabic at the time of revelation. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that that's a meaning, a plausible meaning in the Arabic language, even though it's not, as the scholars of grammar have shown. But would we then take this plausible meaning, right, that it could mean conquer, and use it to the clear, unequivocal text of the Qur'an and the Sunnah? I mean, there are over 1,000 proofs in the Qur'an and the Hadith which say that it shows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above His creation and so forth. And likewise, the understanding of the Salaf, generation after generation, and use this Arabic plausible saying and put it up. No. Not whatsoever. That's just for the sake of argument, had that been plausible. But obviously, it's not even valid in the Arabic language. So that's maybe a poor example. That's the only one that comes to my mind right now. So the point is that we take reference point of our Aqid. This is the fourth principle of Ahlus-Sunnah and their beliefs, is that the clear, unequivocal text of the Qur'an and the Sunnah, the understanding of the Salaf al-Salih, and the Arabic language at the time of revelation. However, when there's something which is linguistically plausible, okay, we will not use a linguistical plausibility to deny something which is a clear, unequivocal text of the Qur'an and the Sunnah, or something which is the clear understanding of the Salaf al-Salih. And that's something which is very important, when sometimes these people try to use these arguments, like the Qadiani. So this is an example, that the word khatim, does it mean the seal, or does it mean the, the last, or the seal, or does it mean like the, the best, or like the, what's the other way you say it? Zina. The beauty of the prophethood, And this is what they try to argue linguistically. So even if that was linguistically plausible, right, as a meaning, in that verse, right, we will still not use that to deny all these other unequivocal texts of the Qur'an and the Sunnah and the Hadith, which shows the Prophet was the last prophet. And the understanding of the Salaf, that the Prophet was the last prophet, there was no prophet to appear afterwards. Okay, so this is something important to keep in mind. That was the fourth principle. Now, principle 5. Okay, so what did we say now? I like to go through the 4 principles really quickly every single time as we add up principles. We can see how the train of thought goes. Restricting the Aqidah only to the book, the Sunnah, and the Ijma' of the Salaf. They confirmed the Ijma' and the authentic Sunnah. We accept whatever is confirmed upon the Prophet ﷺ, whether it's mutawatir or a hadith transmission. The Prophet ﷺ explained all the fundamentals of religion. The reference point for our understanding that is the clear, unequivocal text of Qur'an and Sunnah, the understanding of the Salaf in the Arabic language at the time of revelation. But if there's a linguistical plausibility, we do not use that to deny something which is unequivocal or the clear understanding of the Salaf. The next point, that therefore, if this is the case, we must therefore submit inwardly and outwardly to Allah, His Messenger. And therefore we cannot oppose anything which is established by the Qur'an, the Sunnah, and Aqidah merely because of an analogy, philosophical speculation, qiyas, mystic sensation or unveiling, which they call kashf and dhawq, or the opinion of any scholar. Okay? So, let me put that down. So what's this number? What number are we on? 5? Okay. So therefore we must submit inwardly and outwardly, right? Inwardly and outwardly to the Qur'an and the Sunnah. And we cannot then oppose that by what? Either qiyas, analogy. And over here I mean analogy in the sense of philosophical speculation, matters of belief. We're not talking about analogies of parts of usul of fiqh or matters of fiqh. Okay. 2, mystical experience, which is your kashf or your zawq. And 3, statement of, some scholar or whatever reference point they want to use, right? And you see how the logical conclusion now follows in the beliefs, right? And it's affirmed that the beliefs are only found in the Qur'an and Sunnah. They've been clearly explained. There's no corruption in it. Therefore, what's upon us to submit. And this is why you have to set up understood this. All those principles are explained in one sentence of this. I'll give you the statement of Imam al-Zuhri, for instance. When asked concerning a certain issue, and this you'll find this in Bukhari, I believe. Well, you know it. He said, from Allah is the message, and upon the Prophet is to convey that message, and upon us is to submit. In those few words, he summarized all that I've been saying in the last, 40 minutes or so. That's why the Salaf used to also say about them that their words of Salaf were few, terse, but had much blessing and were very wide meaning. And the words of the Khalaf were a lot of words that little benefit in it. So all that principle was in this, and that's just one saying. From Allah is the message, upon the Prophet ﷺ to convey that message, and upon us is to submit to it. It wasn't a question in their mind that so-and-so said, or, I can't understand this, as they say now, okay brother, it just doesn't seem to get to my, head brother, or I had a dream last night, or, I just don't feel right with this. These things that people use, impediments for, instead of submitting to Allah and His Messenger. Now, that being the case, that we're not going to oppose it by analogy and so forth. But what about now comes the question between revelation and reasoning? Therefore, we come to principle number 6, right? That sound reasoning is always in agreement with correct transmission of revelation. And there's some principles which will be derived from that in a second, corollary. Sound reasoning is always in agreement with correct transmission of revelation. We said that we're not going to oppose the Qur'an and Sunnah, we're going to submit to it. We're not going to oppose it by our reasoning or by mystical experience, right? Or by the statement of so-and-so. But is it possible then, therefore, that reasoning, as many people believe now, Muslims and non-Muslims, that, that religion and reasoning are just two different things, That you have to believe in religion even though it makes no sense. No, it's impossible. Sound reasoning is always in agreement with correct transmission of revelation. Why? Because who is the one who created your mind and gave you the ability to reason? Allah. And who is the one who's sending down the revelation? Allah. And Allah in the Qur'an says, describing the Qur'an, but it's a general principle, that had it been from other than Allah, they would have found much discrepancy or contradiction between them. So that's why we said sound reasoning, because not every single person's reasoning is sound. Sometimes a person will reason it's a faulty reasoning. And that's why we say correct transmission of revelation. Because not everything which is said to be part of the revelation is really part of the revelation. We know, for instance, we have weak hadith, right? And also we know that of the previous scriptures, they've been corrupted. So now we find something in the previous books, right, which goes against sound reasoning. Can we say, therefore, that, okay, that this whole thing of revelation just take it and drop it away? No, because that revelation has no longer been transmitted correctly to us. It's somehow, through the centuries, it's been lost. Okay? Now, out of Allah's great blessing and mercy, that the Qur'an and the Sunnah is preserved until the Day of Judgment. The Qur'an is definitely preserved. And the Sunnah is also preserved, because it's part of the reminder which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He's going to preserve. It's the explanation of the Qur'an. And that's something which, maybe in the lectures of hadith, there will be explanations about how fabricated hadith appeared and how can we be certain that, the sunnah is still in its pristine form, that it hasn't been changed and so forth. But this is something which needs to be discussed, but if we were to discuss it now, we would not finish these principles. So I just want you to understand this general thing. Do you feel I said sound reasoning and correct transmission? Yes, brother.
Yes, does it mean that everything in the Qur'an has a sound reasoning for it? Like you can explain everything with sound reasoning?
No, it doesn't mean that. That's not what we're trying to say.
Okay.
What we're trying to say is, al-aql as-sahih, يعني التفكير الصحيح. Right? لا تخالف الوحي الثابت عن الله أو عن رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. لأن من الذي خلق العقل في الإنسان؟ أليس الله سبحانه وتعالى هو الخالق؟ ومن هو الذي أنزل الوحي على رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم؟ ليس هو الله سبحانه وتعالى؟ إن كان جاء من طريقة الكتاب أو طريقة السنة فمستحيل أن تكون أي نوع من المعارضة بينهما. لكن الإنسان فكر شيء ثم وجد في الكتاب والسنة خلاف ذلك، فالخطأ ليس في الكتاب والسنة، الخطأ في تفكيره. عرفتم كيف؟ أو إذا كان تفكيره صحيح لعل هذا الحديث ليس بثابت، أو لعل هذا الكتاب مثل الكتب القديمة كتب اليهود والنصارى ليست كما أنزل الله سبحانه وتعالى، لكن قد حرف فيما بعد ذلك. هذا هو المعنى هذه القاعدة. لكن ليس المقصود في القاعدة أنك أنت خذ عقلك وخذ تفكيرك نعم ثم اذهب فاحكم على الكتاب والسنة كما تشاء، فما وجدت فيها توافق عقلك فخذه، وما لم تجد فيه في الكتاب والسنة توافق تفكيرك فرجوه. هذا ليس هذا المقصود فيه. الله أعلم. Sorry for that digression. You can cut it out from the tape later. Okay, so now what is the, maybe I should erase it, there's a point which is derived from that, is that when contradiction is imagined, when you imagine contradiction between the Qur'an, or let's say not the Qur'an, Revelation, we should say, Revelation, and reasoning, what are you supposed to do in this case? This is the big question of argument between Ahl al-Hadith and the Ash'aris and others. Huh? Well, but we should understand why. They say put reasoning above revelation. And that's not true. And the reason why we have to sort of spend just a few minutes trying to explain this, that every proof, all proofs, whether lying in revelation or reasoning, are two types. And this is part of usul al-fiqh, Shaykh Jamal will explain to you inshallah. There are those proofs which are called absolute proofs. Absolute, which in Arabic the term is qat'i. These types of proofs mean those proofs which there is no possibility of having another explanation to it. It's just something which is absolute. That's what I mean the word absolute in this sense. And then there are those proofs which are, they mean this, but there's a small possibility, no matter how slight, of not being that. Those are called dhanni. Okay? Dhanni. Now, sometimes they translate dhanni as doubtful. It doesn't mean doubtful. What it means not absolute. Okay? Non-absolute. In the sense that there is some, even if you might imagine, 0.001%, that's small, it's not just absolute in that sense. That there's some chance that understanding could be wrong. So everything, whether in Revelation, any proof in Revelation or in reasoning, is either qat'i or dhanni, without doubt. The correct rule, this is what the Ash'aris and the others couldn't understand, is that when we have two things which we imagine contradiction, because we said there's no contradiction between sound reasoning and correct transmission of revelation. If we imagine that, we have to look at the proofs. If it's a qat'i proof, we put the qat'i before the dhanni proof. Whether that qat'i proof lies in revelation or lies in reasoning. And I'll give you an example. Let us just say for I think the majority of the Muslims will agree, something that we were discussing or somebody picked up a discussion with Brother Jamal after Salat al-Jum'ah concerning whether the earth is flat or round, right? Now, this is, we can say probably with all certainty, or that it's a qat'i proof that the earth is round. There are some evidences in the Qur'an, right, that might indicate that, or somebody might understand from that the earth is flat from that. But these evidences are not qat'i in the sense that they're absolute, that there is a possibility that this is, because there are other evidences which show maybe that the other is true. Okay, because some scholars historically in Islam, like Ibn Hazm and Ibn Taymiyyah, said the earth was round, and they were way before Columbus, right? So, they said the earth was round. You'll find that in the Fatawa, you'll find. And also, in Tabaqat al-Hanabila, a book of biographies of the Hanbali scholars, you'll find the Ijma' al-Tabi'in mentioned in one of the biographies of the earth is round. But the point is that some scholars have based it upon certain arguments of the Qur'an and Revelation, dhanni argument, that the earth is flat. So here we have something absolute and we have something which is not absolute, dhanni. In this case, we would place forth the qat'i to the dhanni. The error doesn't occur in the Revelation, but it occurs in the sense that the proof used in Revelation is not an absolute proof, and the understanding behind it is possibly miscorrect and not 100% valid. So therefore we place reasoning to Revelation. Now, there are other things which Revelation is absolute, like concerning the existence of the torment of the grave. The torment of the grave, right, the punishment in the grave that people will receive, disbelievers and also the sinful of this ummah, may Allah protect us from that, is something which is a qat'i, something, an absolute thing known in Revelation. Because of the numerous hadith in there and also the proofs in the Qur'an and so forth, and the ijma' of the salaf. Therefore, any argument which somebody might bring from reason will not stand up to that qat'i proof. Okay? So the argument is not that we always say we put revelation above reasoning, or that we put reasoning above revelation. But the point is we look at the evidence in that, and we put that which is absolute over that which is not absolute. However though, when we're in doubt, and this is what the brother said, which has truth to it, when we're in doubt, what should we imagine has more chance of having error in our own reasoning or revelation? Our own reasoning. So that's why if it's safe, it's always safer just to put the revelation ahead. And that is why, what is the jiraf, the people who are وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ يَقُولُونَ آمَنَّ بِهِ كُلٌّ مِنْ عِنْدِ رَبِّنَا. Those who are deeply, firmly rooted in knowledge, they say we believe in it in its whole, it's in its entirety, the revelation. It's all from our Lord. Okay? So this principle, Ibn Taymiyyah wrote about in 10 volumes. So this is the first argument he brings about. Now.
Yeah, but if a person rejects dhanni proof in the Quran, let us say, like you said, there's dhanni proof in the Quran that the earth is round, but if a person rejects it...
No, that's the proof that they use phrase that the earth is flat.
Okay, there are some other dhanni proofs which are to the effect that the earth is round. Let us say there are, okay, for the sake of argument. Now, if a person rejects these the qat'i proof in reasoning, and he tends to believe the dhanni proof in Revelation, then what is his... do you think he's wrong, or do you think...
Well, if you're saying if he's rejecting the qat'i proof in reasoning, right? Yeah. I mean, he's rejecting something which is no doubt is true, just like the sun rises from the east and sets in the west, right? Obviously he would be wrong in this case, right? But what would be safer for his religion in this case?
That would be safer for his
What would be safer for his religion?
Allah knows, because this question comes to my mind because I heard that some ulama have have been claiming that...
Okay, that's not the question about the ulama, in certain ulama. The point is that that person who put forth that dhanni proof in the Qur'an over that reasoning, obviously he did not feel that reasoning was absolute. Right? It's difficult to prove reasoning is absolute. Right? You see what I'm saying? I mean, can you prove that a proof from reasoning is absolute? It's somewhat difficult sometimes, right? Because, there's always a possibility that you always have some doubt, right? There's always a shadow of a doubt, as they say, right? That reasoning could be false, right? So that's why it's always better when you imagine contradiction to put revelation to reasoning. But the point is, as a principle, that the proofs are two types, whether found based in revelation and reasoning. There are those which are qat'i and those are dhanni. And qat'i takes precedence to dhanni. whether that qat'i occurs in revelation or occurs in reasoning. And also if you have two proofs in revelation, one qat'i proof in revelation, one dhanni proof in revelation, what do you put forward? The qat'i proof of revelation. And likewise in reasoning, if you have one qat'i reasoning and one dhanni reasoning, you put the qat'i. This is the principle. I mean, I guess Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim, who expounded in this way, try to show that the argument, or the premise of the argument, and maybe this is a failing on my part to explain this earlier, that the premise that the Ash'aris and the others use, okay, that if reason and revelation contradict, we must put forward reasoning, that this premise is a false premise in the first place. And this classification that they use is incorrect. This is not the correct classification. The correct classification is that if a proof is qat'i or a proof is dhanni, we put forward the qat'i proof first. You know, knowing that there could never be any contradiction, that this is only a supposed or imagined contradiction, and that it makes always better sense to attribute fault to one's reasoning or the reasoning of somebody else than to try to attribute fault to revelation. Especially when we know the revelation is confirmed, like hadith or a verse in the Qur'an and so forth.
Someone say that reasoning is relative.
This is the argument of the sophists. And this is one of the principles. We have 20 principles of how do we refute, Ahlus-Sunnah refute people, which I don't think we'll ever get to. This is like the second or third time it's happened. We never get to the 20 proofs. But that we do not argue with the sophists. You see, the sophistry has four types of sophistry. One type of sophistry that every truth is relative. But there's nothing which you can say that is true, you know. And one of the principles of Ahlus-Sunnah Jama'ah that they don't argue with these people because it's just really it's sophistry. It's what they call a sophistry. Yeah, it's not it doesn't value to argue with them. No, that's not sophisticated. It means I would leave this for the philosophers amongst you to expound on your trip back to Houston or Austin. Hey, let's try to quickly run this down before we. What number did we get to? 6, 7, or 7? Okay, this is a very important. We only have about 2 or 3 more. Because I think I cut down the 12 to 10 before, so that's one. It's only 10 really. I think I took out 2. 8 actually. 8.
This is the 8th one.
7 or 8. Okay, in matters of aqidah, it is required to adhere to the wording employed by the Sharia and avoid all innovative wording. Okay, so in matters of aqidah, right? We've now said that we've shown that the aqidah is in the Qur'an and Sunnah, right? That it's been explained and that we're going to submit to it. Okay, now comes our bayan, our explanation of it. You see, after we've submitted to it, we're going to explain it now. We must adhere to the wording employed by the Qur'an and the Sunnah and avoid all innovated wording. In other words, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made part of our religion that we worship Him by to believe in these matters of aqidah, He also made part of our worship to Him that we express this aqidah in a certain way. We have to use certain words which are part of revelation, okay? And that's why, for instance, in describing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you cannot make up names for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But you must use the names that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers Himself by, okay? And likewise, in teaching the religion, in teaching aqidah, you cannot use your own innovative wording, like the philosophers use, okay? Like the, let me try to think of some innovative wording. Like, think of something which is not too much explanation. Like, okay, I'll give you an example, like the word jabr, okay? Jabr means you're compelled upon your